How old are you?
7.
I can't take back what was done. I wish I could. I would give my life for us.
This is Zachary Davis, a 15-year-old boy who was sentenced to life in prison for smashing his mother's head with a sledgehammer. And this is Lionel Tate, the 12-year-old boy who became the youngest person to receive a life sentence in the United States. His crime? Brutally murdering his 6-year-old cousin.
This 12-year-old is indicted for first-degree murder, and he should be tried for that murder.
These young killers, driven by severe mental issues, the thirst for blood, and an unexplained appetite for violence, commit horrible crimes that will send shivers down your spine. But what happens when they're caught and have to face the consequences of their evil actions? Join us on this special episode as we unveil cases of kids reacting to life sentences. Zachary Davis. Around 9 p.m. on August 10, 2012, 15-year-old Zachary Davis entered his mother's bedroom with a sledgehammer, slammed it on her head 8 times, and set the house on fire to kill his older brother, Josh. Hours later, he was caught by the police, sober but unrepentant. But how did a sweet young boy suddenly become a cold-blooded killer? The story begins with Zachary's mother, Melanie Davis, an Australian citizen who moved to Hendersonville, Tennessee to marry the love of her life, Chris Davis. Their marriage was filled with love and harmony, and they were both blessed with 2 strong and healthy boys, Josh and Zachary. Growing up, Zachary's family was an average American middle-class household. However, everything changed in 2007 when his beloved father, Chris, died from a condition known as amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. His death was a big blow to the whole family, but Zachary, who was 10 at the time, took it harder than anyone else. He fell into deep depression and even had to undergo psychiatric treatment with Dr. Bradley Freeman at the Vanderbilt University Medical Center. During examinations, Zachary told Dr. Freeman that he frequently heard voices with no bodies, and as time went by, his mental state became more and more depreciated. Unfortunately, his mother decided to pull him out of psychiatric care and instead moved town to deal with her husband's death. For the rest of his early teenage years, Zachary became known as a loner in school, barely interacting with anyone, and displaying some rather bizarre behaviors. According to his fellow students at the Station Camp High School, Zachary rarely spoke with his regular voice. Instead, he would whisper whenever he was spoken to. Some even said he wore the same hoodie to school every single day. It was obvious that he needed help, but sadly, none was offered. On the 10th of August, 2012, the 46-year-old Melanie took her 2 sons to the local cinema to watch the comedy film The Campaign. As soon as they returned, Zachary locked himself in his room and started packing his bags. You would think he was planning to run away, but as it would later turn out, he had a more sinister plan in mind. While his mother slowly drifted to sleep in her own room, the 15-year-old went down to the basement, picked up a sledgehammer, and headed for her bedroom. In one brutal motion, he struck Melanie in the head over and over again, battering her to death as blood splattered everywhere. He then left the bedroom and locked the door. To continue his devilish plans, Zachary headed to the game room. There, he poured gasoline and whiskey all over the walls and floors and proceeded to set it on fire before escaping from the burning house. His 16-year-old brother, Josh, was sleeping in his room at the time. But as the fire alarm started blaring throughout the house, he woke up with a start and ran to his mother's room. By the time he was able to break down the locked door, he found his lovely mother in a bloody mess, a scene that traumatized him forever. He quickly escaped from the house and went straight to his neighbor's house. The cops were called, and Zachary was declared both missing and wanted. As for the fire, since the wannabe arsonist locked the door to the game room, there was very little oxygen available to fuel the fire, so it soon died out. 5 hours after the 911 call, a Sumner County Sheriff's Office deputy found Zachary walking along a 2-lane road about 5 miles away from his home. He was taken into custody without any resistance and immediately confessed to murdering his mother. However, there was something quite unsettling about the way he talked about it. According to Sheriff Sonny Weatherford, Zachary had this evil smirk on his face, which he continued to display throughout his trial process. Despite being a minor at the time, Zachary was tried as an adult. He pleaded guilty by reason of insanity, and his defense team attempted to get him out of trouble by claiming that he was mentally unstable. The judge, however, didn't agree. This was no spontaneous killing. His actions were deliberate, planned, and executed to the letter. Dr. Bradley Freeman, who examined Zachary, mentioned during his testimony that the young murderer revealed that it was his late father who instructed him to kill his mother. Another psychologist who interviewed Zachary 30 different times since he was arrested stated that he had never encountered someone so severely detached from his emotions. When asked to describe the sounds he heard while bludgeoning his mother, Zachary did so with a bit of laughter and amusement. He would also laugh maniacally throughout the trial and showed no remorse even at his sentencing. He had even tried to pin the murder on his brother, claiming that he took the fall for Josh. But the bloodstains on his clothes and a host of other forensic evidence proved otherwise. At the end of the highly emotional 4-day trial, Zachary was found guilty and sentenced to life, plus 20 extra years for the attempted murder of his brother. Just like with the rest of the trial, he showed no emotions, revealing the true depth of his wicked and evil intentions. When asked whether he would do anything differently if he could go back in time, he revealed that he would have killed his brother with a sledgehammer as well. Thankfully, he's locked away behind bars where he won't be able to hurt any innocent soul ever again. Lionel Tate. July 28, 1999 started as a regular day for Lionel Tate and his family. 12-year-old Lionel was left to watch his cousin, 6-year-old Tiffany Eunuch, who was being babysat by his mother, Kathleen Grossett Tate. The mom was upstairs and the kids downstairs playing. They were quite loud, and the mom was getting annoyed. So she called from her room and asked them to be quiet. 45 minutes later, Lionel came up to his mother with bad news. Tiffany was not breathing. Kathleen rushed downstairs to check on the kid, and that was when she saw a scene that remains etched on her mind forever. The 6-year-old had serious bruises on her legs, feet, and neck. It looked like she had been hit by a speeding car. She also had a fractured skull, lacerated liver, fractured rib, and a swollen brain. 911 was called, and the little baby was taken to the hospital. But it was too late, and she didn't survive the incident. Lionel, who was the only person to see Tiffany alive, was taken into custody by the police. This was the beginning of a case that shook America to its core. During the trial, it was revealed that Tiffany's injuries were so severe that it seemed she was thrown from a 3-story building. But it was Lionel who beat the child to death, and he didn't deny it. In his defense, he claimed he was wrestling with the child. But Lionel was 6 feet tall and weighed 166 pounds, a big boy for his age. Tiffany, on the other hand, was only 48 pounds. So while Lionel thought he was playing, Tiffany was getting brutally murdered. The trial ended in the expected verdict, guilty as charged. But before he was sentenced, Judge Joel T. Lazarus of Broward County Circuit Court addressed the young killer. He stated that the acts of Lionel Tate were not the playful acts of a child, but instead, they were cold, callous, and indescribably cruel. Although the jury did not believe his intention was to kill the little girl, since he murdered a child, he had to be convicted of first-degree murder. He was eventually sentenced to life imprisonment, becoming the youngest person to ever receive the sentence in modern American history. However, the story doesn't end there. In January 2004, the initial sentence was overturned by a state appeals court, and he was released on 1 year's house arrest and 10 years probation. But the story continued on May 23, 2005, when Tate was charged with armed burglary with battery, armed robbery, and violation of probation. He was sent right back to prison to spend 30 years for violating probation. On February 19, 2008, he pleaded no contest to the robbery charge and was sent to spend an extra 10 years in a state prison. As of today, Lionel Tate is currently locked away in the Charlotte Correctional Institution. Nehemiah Griego. On January 19, 2013, officers in South Valley, New Mexico, responded to a distress call. When they arrived at the scene, they found an entire family murdered in cold blood. This was the family of Nehemiah Griego, a 15-year-old boy who killed his father, mother, and siblings in one single night. Around midnight on that fateful day, Nehemiah shot his mother, Sarah, with a rifle. He then woke his brother, Zephaniah, to inform him that he had killed their mother. At first, Zephaniah didn't believe him, so Nehemiah showed him his blood-stained face. At this point, the brother began to panic, so to shut him up, Nehemiah shot him too, with the same rifle. His two younger sisters were also awake by then, crying in their room. The young killer concluded he had to take them out as well, so he entered their shared bedroom and shot them both in the head. After the deed was done, Nehemiah then retrieved an AR-15 semi-automatic rifle, headed downstairs, and waited for his father, Greg Griego, to come back. Around 5 a.m. the following morning, the father returned, and Nehemiah killed him. He then texted his 12-year-old girlfriend a picture of his dead family. Afterwards, he loaded 2 rifles in the van and headed to church. When the pastor asked about his father, Nehemiah told him his family had died in an accident. So to investigate what was going on, the pastor and another member of the congregation, who was a retired homicide detective, followed him to the house. Out of instinct, the former detective felt that something was really wrong, so he dialed 911. On opening the door, they found the body of Nehemiah's dad, covered in blood, along with his mother and siblings. The young boy was immediately taken in for questioning, and that was when the story started to come out. During his interview with detectives, Nehemiah revealed that he had been struggling with violent fantasies and homicidal thoughts, and that he always wanted to take his own life. So he began making plans to murder his family, his girlfriend's family, and even strangers at a local Walmart. He planned to go out with even more blood on his hands, but became overwhelmed after killing his father. The father, 51-year-old Greg Griego, was a former gang member who changed his ways and became a pastor at the area's Calvary Church. He also served as a chaplain to the Albuquerque Fire Department. On the day of his death, Greg was on his way back from his shift at the homeless shelter before his life was snatched away by his own son. At just 15 years old, Griego was classified as a minor. However, he was charged as an adult under New Mexico law, although he couldn't be sentenced to death or life without parole. At first, he was sentenced to serve time at the Juvenile Correctional Center. But in November 2019, Nehemiah received a sentence of 7 years for killing his parents and 3 life sentences for the murder of his siblings. His back was turned to the camera throughout the sentencing, and his expression was unreadable. His lawyer, in his final speech, asked the judge to help him get the help he needs for his mental struggles. However, only time will tell how he will eventually turn out. Nehemiah will be eligible for parole after serving 30 years. He will be 52 years old by then. Sarah Johnson. September 2nd, 2003, 16-year-old Sarah Johnson called 911 to report that there was an intruder in the house. Minutes later, the cops arrived at the family home in Bellevue, Idaho, only to find both Sarah's parents dead from gunshot wounds. Alan Johnson, her dad, was shot twice in the chest as he came out of the shower. Her mother, Diane Johnson, was also shot in the head while she was sleeping in the master bedroom. The only problem was that this murder wasn't carried out by an intruder, but by Sarah herself. It all began when the teenager suddenly fell in love with a slightly older teen named Bruno Santos. Santos had a bad reputation in the neighborhood and was known to have links to drug gangs. This didn't sit well with Sarah's parents, who demanded that she end the relationship. Her father even approached Santos, threatening to report him to the authorities if he failed to leave their daughter alone. To Sarah, her parents were standing in the way of her happy relationship, and with each passing day, she became more defiant. She would sneak out of the house to meet Santos, and they would both engage in sexual activities. She even smuggled him into the house to have some fun right under her parents' nose. But on that fateful weekend, Alan and Diane decided they'd had enough. So they took her car keys and grounded her indefinitely. This forced her to make the decision that ultimately ruined her life. Believing that the only way to be with Santos was to murder her parents, Sarah headed out to the guest house attached to the family home and picked up the tenant's shotgun. She wore a glove to prevent her fingerprints from getting on the gun before heading out to her parents' bedroom. First, she shot her mother, who was lying in bed, asleep. Then she turned the gun on her father as he came out of the shower. When officers finally arrived on the scene, they found a bloody mess, 2 lifeless bodies, and 2 large knives at the foot of the bed. Outside in a waste bin, they found a discarded pink bathrobe, a latex glove, and a single leather glove. At first, officers turned their attention to Santos, who they believed to be the intruder. However, the more evidence they found, the less guilty he looked. Then they suspected that the tenants, whose gun was used in the murder, must have been responsible. But they also had a strong alibi since they were not at home. With more fingers pointing at the daughter, there was no other option but to charge her for the crime. At first, she maintained her intruder story, claiming that someone had broken into the home and killed her parents. But the specks of blood on her pink bathrobe and the gunpowder residue on the latex gloves proved otherwise. Following a highly emotional trial, Sarah was found guilty, and at her sentencing, she appeared more sorry for herself than for her victims. On the outside, she put on a sober facade, but on the inside, she was only sad she got caught. In the end, the young killer was sentenced to life in prison and is currently serving time at Pocatello Women's Correctional Center in Idaho. Although she has made many attempts to overturn her conviction, there is a high chance that she will spend the rest of her life locked away behind bars. Before we unveil even more disturbing cases, here's our subscribers' pick for today. With each case of kids reacting to life sentences that we explore, we are reminded of the universality of crimes and the people who commit them. This image, depicting a young child bound in chains and wearing a spit mask, captures the true nature of what unfolds in a courtroom when minors are involved. While there is a general belief that children are simply innocent beings, incapable of hurting others, these stories prove otherwise. From Sarah Johnson to Nehemiah Griego, the preacher's kid, every story proves one fact: that even children can possess a dark heart capable of evil deeds that the human mind cannot comprehend. Which of these stories shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments section below. Now, let's get back to more haunting cases. Daniel Petrick. October 20th, 2007. 16-year-old Daniel Petrick walked into his parents' living room and asked his father and mother to close their eyes because he had a surprise for them. But when they complied, he brought out a 9mm handgun and shot them in the back. The reason for this unreasonable display of violence was because Daniel's father, Mark Petrick, confiscated his video game, which he was extremely addicted to. You see, the story began after Daniel experienced a snowboarding accident, which left him with a severe staph infection. The spinal damage was so intense that any little injury could leave him paralyzed. So to safeguard himself, Daniel was forced to stay at home for a year. With nothing to do but watch TV, Daniel would wander around the house, bored. But everything changed when a friend introduced him to the Halo series video game. He would play the game for hours at his friends' houses, and it didn't take long for him to get engrossed in the world of violence depicted in the game. However, his father, who is a minister at New Life Assembly of God Church in Wellington, didn't approve of the game. He believed it was too violent and excessive sexual depictions. Regardless, Daniel managed to play the game without his parents ever finding out. One day in September 2007, he snuck out of his bedroom window to purchase the game at a store, even after his father warned against it. Upon returning home, his parents caught him with the game and took it from him. This made him extremely angry, and for the next month, he laid out the plans to get his game back. On October 20th, Daniel finally got his hands on the keys to his father's lockbox. There, he found the Halo 3 game, along with his father's handgun. According to Daniel's father, he was expecting a pleasant surprise when his son asked him to close his eyes, but then his head went numb and blood began to pour from a bullet wound at the back of his head. It was at this time that he realized his wife, Susan Petrick, was also lying dead on a nearby love seat. She had been shot in the head, arms, and chest by her own son. After the deed was done, Daniel then shoved the gun into his hand and said, "Hey Dad, here's your gun. Take it." It was a chilling moment that truly revealed the darkness that filled his heart. But at first, Daniel tried to make it seem like his father was responsible for the murder. According to his story, he had walked in on his father shooting his mom and had witnessed him taking his own life as well. This story would have been accepted, except for one tiny detail. His father survived. You see, right after Daniel shot his parents, his sister, Heidi Archer, and her husband, Andrew, arrived at the home to watch a game with the family. It was thanks to their quick response that Mark Petrick walked out of the incident alive and came out to narrate the true account of events. However, he also later appeared in court to plead for mercy on his son's behalf, claiming that he had no history of violent behavior and asking that the judge consider giving him a more lenient sentence. His family also claimed to have forgiven him, and strangely, they wanted him to be released so the family could heal together. But the law had to take its course, and Daniel was found guilty by the jury. Throughout the trial, he showed no emotions whatsoever, except when his mother's autopsy pictures were flashed on the large screen for the court to see. He then bowed his head and stared at his hands for about 20 minutes, refusing to look up at the screen. He was eventually sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 23 years. Tyler Hadley. When 17-year-old Tyler Hadley announced he would be having a party at his house on July 16, 2011, his friends believed it was a regular high school party. But while the youngsters danced and drank at his family home later that day, no one realized his father and mother were lying dead in their bedroom. Earlier that fateful day, Tyler made a post on his Facebook wall stating, "Party at my crib tonight, maybe." But the only person who he confided in was an unidentified friend. According to information provided during the investigation, Tyler told this friend that he was planning to do something that had never been done before, hosting a big party after committing a parricide. After his parents returned home that day, Tyler set his plans in motion. He hid their phones and locked their black Labrador in a closet so it wouldn't defend the parents or raise an alarm. Just before 5 p.m. on that fateful day, Tyler took 3 pills of ecstasy, and as the effects of the drugs kicked in, he picked up his chosen weapon. His mother, Mary Jo, was working on her computer in the family room when Tyler appeared behind him, holding a claw hammer. Out of nowhere, he struck his unsuspecting mother with the back end. Hearing the screams that followed, Tyler's father rushed out of the bedroom to find his son brutally attacking his mother. Out of shock, he froze until Tyler came over and attacked him as well. After murdering his 2 parents in cold blood, Tyler then dragged their bodies to the master bedroom, and for the next 3 hours, he tried to clean up the house. He also picked up every household item that reminded him of his parents and threw them on top of their bodies. After making the house as clean as possible, he found his parents' credit cards and started preparing for the after-murder party. CCTV footage at the ATM captured the moment he withdrew the cash out of their accounts, before heading out to purchase alcohol and everything else he needed for his infamous party. Around 60 people attended the party that day, and some of them would later reveal that they noticed the smell of dead bodies in the house. As the party went on, Tyler and his friend Michael Mandel went for a walk, and he told him everything he had done that day. Michael managed to remain calm, but after returning to the party, he went to the master bedroom to find the lifeless bodies of Tyler's parents. However, he didn't leave the party immediately and went on to stay for a few more hours. He even took a selfie with Tyler after the revelations, before finally exiting 4 hours later and calling the cops. Very early the next morning, the killer teen was arrested. It was then that Tyler's true image began to come out. Apparently, the teenager had begun skipping school and taking drugs recently. He also participated in drug sales, vandalism, arson, thefts, and aggravated battery. He'd even been involved in a $15,000 civil lawsuit after hitting and injuring a child with his father's car in June 2010. But it wasn't until he killed his own parents that his notoriety came to an end. Prior to their deaths, Tyler's parents had tried to help him by enrolling him in an outpatient drug treatment program, but it failed, and he continued to use drugs. At first, the prosecution sought the death penalty, but since he was a minor, that was impossible. Instead, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, although his demeanor during sentencing showed that he didn't care about the lengthy time behind bars. Even before he was sentenced, Tyler spent his time signing autographs for fellow inmates, and he chose a new nickname, Hammer Boy. Thankfully, the cold-blooded killer is now locked at the Blackwater Correctional Facility, where he will likely spend the rest of his life. Philip Chisholm. As teen murderer Philip Chisholm marched into the courtroom for his sentencing, his face showed no signs of guilt or remorse. Chisholm was in court to receive his punishment for assaulting and murdering his 23-year-old high school teacher, Colleen Ritzer, back in 2013. For the crimes, Salem Superior Court Judge David Lote handed down a combined and concurrent sentence of 40 and 25 years in prison. Chisholm was 14 when he committed these horrific crimes, but that didn't matter since he was charged as an adult. He won't be getting out of jail until he turns 54. But even with that prospect, the young murderer showed no emotion in court. Before the sentencing, the victim's family were allowed to speak to the court. One by one, they expressed their anger towards the teen, while also pleading with the judge to deliver the adequate punishment. Colleen's mother spoke of how the death had left her so very broken that she now had to pretend to be happy. Some family members even requested a death sentence. However, this was impossible to pursue under Massachusetts law. Following the sentencing, Philip Chisholm was moved to a secure juvenile detention center in Worcester, where he had been since the beginning of his trial. But once he turns 18, he will be transferred to a state prison to serve the rest of his sentence. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.